go. Good afternoon, everyone. There we go. This is a lovely spot and a slot to speak immediately after lunch. I'm going to get us to do some breathing exercises first so that we have some energy to keep us listening. If I can ask you all to take a deep breath in. And now fast exhales 5 times. And you can do that as many times as you want, and that is one way in which you can generate energy in 5, 10, 15 seconds. But I'm not going to speak for 20 minutes on how we breathe. I want to show this picture now because it's very memorable. This one is taken exactly about 8 months ago, right here, where we were on a part of a special focused group on eradicating modern-day slavery. And I brought my daughter along with me. And the picture there, you see her, she sat for 3 hours in this corner here. And she listened to every single person who spoke. And instead of speaking or playing on a video game, she drew the drawings of how she understood what she was listening. And then in the lunch break, she sold those pictures. She raised 70 euros. And that's the picture of Adam Robinson, who was her first donor. And the money went to fund a child's education in Africa. Thank you. I will pass this on to her. But the more important thing was immediately after that, she went to one of the co-founders and said, I'd like to make a presentation to the group. And after lunch, she was given a minute to talk to everyone who was present at the meeting. And this is what she said. She said, slavery is like Coca-Cola. And we all know Coca-Cola is bad for our body. The same way slavery is bad for the world, and we must stop it. That was her 1-minute speech. And that's an 8-year-old. What values did you see she embodied? On the surface, yes, she was embodying confidence, she was embodying courage, she was embodying creativity. But what was the underlying value she was embodying? Yep, altruism. But also, I would say, underlying value she was embodying is integration, fraternity, union. In those 3 hours, that child, that consciousness, was part of the collective field of this room. And part of that was because there was someone who said to her, this is how you could show up as, and this is how you can be of value and contribution to this group. And human conduct, in many ways, is driven by this self-alignment, and when we are nudged and anchored and guided by people who say what we stand for. So I would like you all to take 1 minute now to reflect on what are your personal values. What personal values do you choose? Do you choose to commit to stand up and show up as in the world now, in the face of the challenges we face and in the face of all the opportunities that lie before us? So I would like you to spend 30 seconds, 1 minute to reflect on the personal values that you choose to embody. And when you have these values down, have a check. Do you have partnership in that value? If not, please write it at the top. Please write it at the bottom. Because if we here in this room are gathered and commit to creating a fraternal society, a society that is united in all shapes and forms, I say that partnership is the key essential value that we all need to embrace and enact for us to create that fraternal society we want to create. And why do I say that? There are three reasons why. Firstly, as an accountant, I learned how economics drive behaviors. And at this point in time, we are living in an economic context where we are liquidating the underlying asset, the planet, and we are calling it income. We are liquidating the asset, we are calling it income. Our values, what we say, are different from the values of how we conduct our life. And that is because we value in the economic system that we live in a dead tree over an alive one. We value more a dead fish in the ocean than an alive fish in the ocean. We value more sick people than healthy people. We value more war than peace. That is because some of the industries that are underlying and driving and producing the goods and services are for-profit industries. And in the economic context we live in, these for-profit industries have the imperative to continue growing and growing endlessly, and we know that doesn't work. So as young leaders, I would say, we can choose to go down the low road of fractionalization or partition, where we say we volunteer our time and we do some good work, and then we still continue and progress the current underlying way in which the current system works, and we go down the avenue of aimless ambition, or ambition, but that still doesn't serve the partnership imperative. We can go down the low road into sunsetting sectors, I call them, where we are looking at investing our time and resources in businesses and in activities that we know don't serve the 2030 agenda. For example, fossil fuels, telecom, etc. Or we can choose to go down the high road of partnership. We can be present to what needs to be done. We can be present to what is our primary purpose. And then we can choose to participate in actions in all aspects of our lives, not just in our professional aspect, personal, professional, and planetary, the time we volunteer to do other work that is totally aligned with the SDG agenda. And this is our choice. So coming to the topic of youth, I would just like to quickly say here, as young people, we will be more than 50% of the global population. We are inheriting a planet which has many issues, social, political, economic. I won't go into the details of that. But the underlying issue is that as young people, the decisions being made now impact our future, and we are not part of the decision-making process that is happening right now. And if, as the Youth Symposium, we want to incubate and partner on initiatives, as much as we need to partner on the subsystem innovations around each of the goals, we also need to rise up and above and look at partnerships. How do we form partnerships to resolve some of the systemic issues that create these challenges we face? For example, there are more than 10 youth networks that we know of. Are we partnering with them? Could we create an initiative where we partner with these youth networks specifically around SDGs, and how as young people, not just in this forum, in other forums, we come around together for achieving the goals? Second, I would say, could we incubate an initiative as the Youth Symposium, where we choose, or where we decide in the next year we announce 5 countries, 5 businesses, 5 leaders of nonprofits, go and present at a press conference and say they have appointed 1 young person in a decision-making capacity to address and ensure that their activities align with the Sustainable Development Goals, and and they say, and they announce it to the world, and they ask their peers to follow suit. So we have one young person infiltrating this partnership virus in every aspect and every domain of human functioning and interaction that occurs on this planet. Those of us who are not minded or not inspired particularly to play at the macro level, we can look at our own organizations that we work with. Are our organizations aligned with the SDGs? Yes, no. If not, how are we going to have a long-term strategy and action backed by it? And finally, on a personal level, I would say to realign our compass from this having, doing, being mindset or frame to a doing, to a being, doing, having. What do I mean by that? When I have the money, I will do this, and that will allow me to be in partnership. We need to switch that paradigm and become, I'm going to be in partnership, I'm going to do the SDG work, and I will have X, Y, Z resources in place to make that happen, and start designing our life that way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have some time to open the floor for questions and comments. Yes, so are there any questions or comments from the floor with regards to this particular presentation? Professor, do you have anything?
Groups, the other groups that you're thinking about?
Sorry?
Who are the other youth groups that you're thinking about?
One Young World, World Merit, UNSDS and Youth Symposium. I imagine there is Nexus, so there is groups that are working specifically on how the resource or the wealth transfer that's going to occur goes to millennials, and so there are various ways in which we can engage around making it an integrated initiative. Thanks.
So I just wanted to add, one of the things that we've been looking a lot in, or working with in Canada, is P3s is one. We've added a fourth P, which is philanthropy, leveraging philanthropy and those funding and resources to actually fund initiatives that otherwise wouldn't have been funded by government for a number of different reasons. And so in this way, what we've been able to do is really focus and prioritize resources that the government has purview over, and then allow those within philanthropy to leverage up additional funding by going, for example, $500,000 from philanthropists, going to a Big Four firm and their foundation, matching that, going to a Big Five bank in Canada, matching that. And in that way, we've been able to actually develop more, and I think from a partnership perspective, aligns with what you've been talking about and how we've tried to put that into practice in Canada. So I just wanted to offer that.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm curious, you talked about trying to get young people in decision-making positions in businesses. From the experience that I have from large businesses, very few, if any, would be willing to do that. So how do you convince them?
That's our job. It's not easy. Like Dr. Sachs just said, it's not easy, but that's our path. And I do believe that there are enough number of leaders, like we know Paul Pullman. Within this network, we have the connections that are needed to just kickstart and ignite this process. We don't have to go to the end run, but the first step would be people who are already speaking the SDG language, who are already committed in their game to do something about the SDGs. We go and have a conversation with them. So for example, in a business context, I would say, could we approach Paul Pullman? Could we approach a few other leaders in other countries so that it's not just a Western-focused leadership initiative? Thanks. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? All right.
There's one there, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
My question for you is simply, you talked about educating the organizations, the structures, the hierarchies, if you will. What's a good way of understanding how we get SDGs to be a populist, grassroots, known on the ground not bypassing organizations, et cetera, but average Joe and Jane aren't going to know every SDG. How do we best communicate it on the ground to people in a compelling, concise format?
Yeah, thank you. I feel there is a lot of work that is already being done. I don't know how many of you were following the UN SDG week last week ago in New York. There are several movements, there are several initiatives that are happening at a grassroots level, at a country level, at a business level. I think our job as young people is to integrate and create platforms where we can start pooling all these initiatives that are happening and looking at best practices and starting to scale them. So I feel it's not so much about creation, it's about distribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I think that was actually a very good question and a very relevant one, in fact, on how do we communicate the SDGs? But to communicate the SDGs effectively, I think we have to also understand why the framework was created. Why is the framework useful? How can we use it as a tool? Why do we have it? We don't, I mean, issues such as eradicating poverty and addressing climate change and inequality, these are nothing new. But what is so unique and specific and important about the SDGs that is different? And I think that question is best put to one of the people who helped design a lot of the goals and work on them for many years, Professor Sachs. So, Professor, if you could maybe give us a very quick overview of why you think the SDGs are so important and how can we use it as a tool for addressing a lot of these things.
On this. We had Millennium Development Goals. They were put forward by Kofi Annan. At that point in 2000, that was an idea that Kofi Annan had. A group of advisors put them on the table. They were there. They made an important difference. And in 2012, when there was the 20th anniversary of the Earth Summit, the Rio Earth Summit, the government of Colombia said, we need global goals for sustainable development in the same way that we had had global goals for fighting extreme poverty. Then a discussion took place, are we giving up on fighting extreme poverty? No, that will be SDG number 1. So we'll keep the Millennium Development Goal agenda, but we'll integrate it with more attention to social justice, more attention to jobs, and more attention to the environment. 3 years of negotiation took place at the UN, and in the middle of 2015, the goals were almost finalized, and then in 2014, they were almost finalized, then in August 2015, they were finalized, and they were adopted in September 2015. What's the idea? The idea is that it's a common reference point for the world. If we don't use them, it's no reference point at all. So it is what in game theory you call a focal point or bargaining point that, okay, the negotiations have been done, but they are only as good as you bootstrap them to reality. So if the attitude is, what difference does it make? Goals are goals. We've always had them. We've got to get on with real life. They will mean nothing. On the other hand, if every day when you are doing your work, you're saying we're part of a global movement, what we're doing has already been agreed but not achieved, and we need to follow through and achieve our goals, I think that that's the added value. The world's very noisy and very complicated, and it's not often that the world agrees on anything. It took 3 years to get this agreement. We will not have any other agreement during the period to 2030, so either we'll have no agreement or we'll have disagreement. That is objectively the case. The same thing with climate change. Either we honor the Paris Climate Agreement or we will have no agreement. There's no scope for anything else for your generation, so that's done. Either you take them or you don't take them. But if you don't take them, you have nothing. Don't think you're going to make another one in the short period of time. This is really lucky and hard work that these goals are in place. So my view is make them real. Live them. Always promote them as our only goals. They are literally the only globally agreed goals that we have. And they're good ones. That's the nice part of it. That's almost coincidental. The world could have agreed on terrible things, but it agreed on quite wonderful things. But the most important thing is it agreed. And so that gives us what Pope Francis said. He said, our interdependence obliges us to think about a common plan. We're obligated to think about these goals. That's really the point of all of this. So we have to bootstrap them to reality. And every time someone says, it's the UN and so on, you say that just makes it a little bit harder, but what else? It is hard. Getting billions of people to think on the same thing in this world, not easy. And to do that in short period of time with a crisis approach, working together, not easy. So that's why we have them.
Great, thank you very much for that. So.